Hello and welcome to Just Films and That with me, Josh Hallam.
And me, Alice Oliver. This is the podcast where we talk about films that we think are underrated, underappreciated, or we just wanted to talk about them.
We're also going to get stuck into some classic films that one of us maybe hasn't seen, and maybe throw in some great guests along the way. So we'll start with a random question as we do every week. Alice, have you ever, or would you ever skydive?
Oh, I have done that actually, yes. But would I do it again? I don't know. So I did it. I did it in New Zealand because, if you go to New Zealand, you've got to do a skydive. And it was, I would say, the most terrified I've ever been in my whole life. So you got to wear these massive overalls, obviously. And then you go up in this really rickety plane and you're just kind of sat by the door of the plane. It just feels so you're just really exposed, I think, to the air. So we're going up and over. I went from 9,000 meters. I think it was meters or feet. It must be meters. I just basically went for the cheapest one because the lower down you go, the cheaper it is. It went up to well high, and it was like
Tesco
150.
value skydive.
Yeah, I had to, man. It's I barely had any money on the trip, so I was like, well, I've got to do it. So I went from about 9,000. Can't remember if it's meters or feet. And just the whole way up, basically, it was one of the few times in my adult life where I thought I was going to shit myself. We were halfway up. It kept going higher and higher. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to shit myself in these overalls with the guy, because you've got the guy on your back, haven't you? Who's got to do the parachute and all that for you. And we're going to be squished. And it's going to be a shit sandwich between me and this guy. But I didn't. So you do the thing where you hang your legs over the side and it's like, right, go. And you just you don't, because they're doing all the work for you. So you don't really have to think about jumping or anything. You've just got to be ready to be let go. And then you start falling towards the earth, at unbelievable speeds, only for a little bit. And then the parachute comes out. And then once that happens, the fear kind of goes a little bit and you just sort of float back down to earth. But yeah, so I have done. It was great. I'm so glad I did it, but I was so scared. So I probably would do it again, actually, thinking about it, because there's no real risk. And now that I've done it once, I say there's no real risk. Obviously, things can go wrong, but I think very, very tiny percentage. But no, yeah, I think I would do it again. But yeah, fucking terrifying. Scariest thing I've ever done. Anyway, sorry, that was a really long way of saying yes. What about you, Josh? Have you or would you ever skydive?
No, I never have. But I would. Although now you've said that, I'm starting to think maybe if I do it, it'll be on an empty stomach.
Well, absolutely. Just don't eat the day before, or, just eat, plain pasta or a bowl of rice. No veggies. No
fibre.
Alcohol.
Absolutely no fibre.
Yeah.
No,
in fact, let yourself get constipated.
Yeah, just a full stick of bread and then jump out of a plane.
Exactly. So we'll move on to talking about this week's film, which is one that Josh chose. It's The Road to El Dorado from the year 2000. It's a DreamWorks film. So spoiler warnings if you haven't seen it. Josh, tell us, what is this film about and why did you pick it?
So The Road to El Dorado is a sort of a family film, a kid's film. It's a cartoon, and it's about two gold-obsessed con men in the 1500s who accidentally find themselves as stowaways on a ship from Spain to what is known as the New World. They escape from the ship and wash ashore on an unknown island. Using a map that they've won earlier on in the film whilst gambling, they actually realise that they've washed ashore on what they think is the island of El Dorado. A legend says that this island has a city on it which is made entirely of gold. So obviously they're very interested in the gold. So when they arrive at the city, they're greeted by the locals as gods. So they decide to swindle the city, steal as much gold as they can, go back to Spain and live like kings. However, as these things always do, they get a little bit more than they bargained for along the way. I chose this one for a few reasons. First of all, we hadn't done a film like this for a little while, sort of more family-orientated film. I think the last one we did was All Dogs Go to Heaven. So I also think it's underrated and Underseen, because I don't think it did well when it came out critically or commercially. But I think it's a good film. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it's picked up a bit of a cult following over the years. So, what about you? Had you seen it?
I hadn't seen it. I'd heard of it, but I don't think I knew like anything about it. I don't think I'd seen sort of any imagery for it. So I was going in not really having any idea what I was saying. Oh, I think I knew that it was a cartoon, but that was about it. But I did really enjoy it, and like you say, it was really fun, and it was actually really funny. Is this one that you'd seen a few times, or is this kind of just the first time, kind of going back to revisit it after you'd seen it for the first time?
No, do you know what? This is quite a film I've seen a couple of times. I think I went to the pictures to see it, or if I didn't, I must have got it on video or DVD when it came out on those when I was younger. But no, it's one I always go back to as just a nice fun time. Sort of like a bit like other films we've done, you pop it on a Sunday. It's a good background film. It's a good film. It's a good feel-good film. But no, I really like it. So I have seen it a couple of times. So obviously you said you had a good time with it. So what did you like about it?
So I did think it was funny. I thought there was quite a good few jokes in there. The chemistry between the two leads, Miguel and Tulio, I thought that was really good. And they had a really good relationship. They're a bit like yin and yang. You've got one of them who's just kind of more about the adventure and a bit more romantic and a bit more, I want to see the world. And then, so that's Miguel, right? Who's a little bit like that. And then Tulio, who's a bit more kind of straightforward. Like, I just want tons of cash. I just need to get from A to B. Like, he just wants to go to El Dorado to get all the gold and then head straight back to Spain. Whereas Miguel he sees the beauty in it, and, he sees this wonderful place that he wants to explore. He's a musician as well. So it's like he's this creative soul. And they just worked really well together. The music as well, I thought, was really good. So Elton John, right? It's all kind of Elton John music.
So I think it's Elton John and Tim Rice. So Tim Rice and Elton John are famous mainly for the Lion King soundtrack, as amongst other things. But yeah, I mean, the music for me is a highlight. It's great. It's really good music.
Yep, their songs were really catchy. They flowed really nicely. It was funny because it's almost like DreamWorks kind of saw the success of Elton John with The Lion King and was like, right, we need a bit of that, fellas. But didn't quite turn out as they'd hoped, sadly. But no, thought the songs were really good. And interesting how, so we had a few kind of diegetic moments that kind of mixed in with the non-diegetic sound. So quite near the beginning, we've got Miguel who's playing... So it was like a sitar or a lute?
Something
like, I'm not totally clued up on
some
musical
sort of string instrument.
A string instrument that wasn't a guitar.
I'm not up on my 1500s musical instruments. It's
I know,
not my...
bad that, isn't it?
Yeah. I should have read up about it. Should have done.
But
yeah, sorry, as you were saying.
So he's got a few moments with that where the non-diegetic music will be playing, and then he'd play a few notes that kind of go in time with it. And then we had another moment like that where they're on the ship initially going over to Spain, going over to El Dorado from Spain, where Tulio's banging his head against like the wall of the ship because they've been... What's happened there? So they're on the ship, they've kind of been captured, they're sort of being kept prisoner.
So yeah, so they escape. They escape one group of men that they've wronged. Basically, they're just constantly moving from scrape to scrape, aren't they?
They're con men, aren't they?
They're con men, yeah. So it starts with them, and they're using loaded dice to win money off some local other con men or blokes or whatever. And that's when they win. That's when they get the map to El Dorado. And as they escape, they jump into some barrels, which are then immediately loaded onto a ship. They're then found in the barrels, and it's the General Cortez, who's one of the main villains of the film, who is on the way to the New World, and he just puts them in the brig and basically says to them, when we get to Cuba to restock, you'll be sold as onto the plantations, basically.
Onto the plantations, onto the sugar plantations. Grim. So they're in the brig, and so Tulio's banging his head against the sort of the wall or the hull of the ship, and it's in time with the non-diegetic music. So it was just really interesting how the two flowed together. And in terms of the songs, you didn't get that many diegetic songs going on within the world. I think there was 2, maybe 3, but most of it was happening as narration. I saw in the credits that Elton John is credited as the narrator, kind of first and foremost. So that was interesting. And I just loved having the story told in that way. And I think it really added, because it's such a colourful film and you get so many different great locations. Some of the animation was just beautiful. So I thought the way that they used that kind of musical narration not too dissimilar to Hercules, really, worked really, really well. Just going off the animation, the water animation I thought was gorgeous, and they did such a good job of that. And you get such different kind of iterations of it. So they're out on the open ocean. You've got these beautiful sort of rivers and ponds and stuff. When you're in El Dorado, there's a storm. There's it all looking just beautiful and tropical. And you could tell, or it really felt like a lot of work went into the animation, and it really paid off.
No, I completely agree. I think it looks amazing, and I think a real effort's gone into it to give it a distinctive style that's different from, say, Disney. So I think one of the things that I tried to bear in mind when I was watching it is that this is before DreamWorks had its massive first hit, which I think was Shrek in terms of family films. So they're still trying to find their feet a little bit with what their style is. And it's quite clear that obviously the Disney films, particularly late 80s and 90s, had such a strong template of how they worked that this film does take a little bit of that. But one thing I liked, back to what you were saying about the music, is that if you look at Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Hercules, all the other films that came before this that are Disney, obviously this is not Disney, the music is sung by the characters. Whereas in this, it's just sung by narrator. There's one song which Tulio and Miguel sing, and all the others, from memory, I think, are narration songs, like you say. So that, I think, is what differentiates it a little bit from Disney. You don't have, Simba and Nala singing "Can I Feel the Love Tonight" to each other whilst a load of kids watch Two Lions Bang and other stuff. But no, so that's one thing I liked. Completely agree with you about the animation. I think it looks gorgeous. The main thing I like, back to what you said at the beginning, is the script. I think it's so funny. It's the same writers as Mask of Zorro and Pirates of the Caribbean, or some of the Pirates of the Caribbean films. So I think it's funny, a little bit funnier than your average kids film for me. I think it does that great thing which a lot of family films do, which is it disregards things like authenticity for the sake of humor and approaches everything, very tongue in cheek. So like, they can all speak English. Well, they don't all speak English, but they all speak the same language, that sort of thing. A lot of films, may consider that as, a bit lackluster, but I don't. I just think, well, it doesn't really matter for the sake of entertaining, particularly kids. Or, things like historical accuracy, like when they when he says they're going to Cuba, Miguel goes, "All right, Cuba," like that, as if it's like the holiday destination that a lot of people. I know, problems with Cuba aside, I don't know that much about it, but the fact of the matter is, it's meant to be an amazing place to go as a holiday. And also, I don't even think it was called Cuba. Like, I think it was. I don't think it was called Cuba for like hundreds of years later and stuff like that. So I quite like that. I also like the fact that it's layered with different types of comedy. So there's jokes in there for the parents, a little bit like some Pixar films. Like, so there's a bit, isn't there, where they're escaping the big ship and they're on the little rowing boat trying to get away, and he does that thing where he goes, "Holy ship!" Like, and obviously the joke is "holy shit," but kids don't know that, and it's like, that looking at the parents being like, "Yeah, we know you're in the pictures. You don't want to be here, but here's a little something for you," that sort of thing. Or, the fact that Chell, who is one of the people from the city of El Dorado, has their dice and she gives them back, and one of them says something like, "Where was she keeping them?" Because obviously she's only really wearing sort of like a sarong and some underwear or whatever. But then there's slapstick in there for the kids as well, which I also found really funny. So there's a bit where, again, they're stranded on a rowing boat and they're starving, and a seagull lands on the oar and they sort of start licking their lips ready to get it, and then a shark immediately comes up from the water and grabs it. Or there's just loads of different types of comedy and I just think it's a really funny film. I think it's a cut above in terms of funniness of other films, like some of your bog standard Disneys and stuff like that. So yeah, and other than that, that's I agree everything with you. The chemistry between the two leads is a real highlight. I think it's quite clear that, and I was reading about this when I was prepping my notes, that they recorded their dialogue together, which I don't think is that, or wasn't that common at the time to do so. But I think that really helps build that relationship between the two of them. Like you said, they both sort of want similar things, but they also don't, and they're both quite different. And I really like that.
But it's interesting as well to have a film where there is two main characters who are the two main characters. It's like, if you look at something like Shrek, it's like, oh yeah, you've got Shrek and Donkey, but it's all about Shrek.
Shrek
like the
story,
film's
innit?
called
Yeah,
Shrek.
yeah.
Or if you look at something like Lion King, you know, okay, yeah, you've got Mufasa and Nala and everything, but it's Simba's story and it's all about Simba. Whereas this, it felt like it was both of them.
It's
it was
equal,
their
innit?
story.
It's so equal. Yeah.
And that's really interesting. And it just kind of opens the door a little bit more for that comedy, I think. And I can totally believe like what you're saying, that they recorded their lines together, because there did feel like there was something extra. Like there was just something more natural, more funny, more... They just worked really well together, I think.
Yeah. I got a question for you. Tulio and Miguel. Quite fit? Fit lead characters? Fit cartoon lead characters?
For cartoon characters? I mean, yeah, of course.
Who's your favourite, though? Miguel or Tulio?
I mean, if you look at my husband and then look at Tulio, I mean,
that is true, actually.
Basically the same guy.
Yeah,
right?
I didn't
and
think
my
about
husband
that.
He's of Spanish heritage. His grandmother was Spanish. So, yeah.
I should have shown you this film earlier.
Oh, I know, yeah. I mean, can you imagine if young little Alice had seen it? Woo, she wouldn't have left the house.
For me, it's all about Miguel for me, but then he's your open shirt guy with his guitar, and he's the romantic.
Well, yes, he's a dreamer, isn't he? He's
Both
the creative one, musical.
Pretty sexy lead characters. So, I mean, was there anything else that you liked?
So I like that it kind of straddled a few different genres. Like you said there about it sort of being, a cut above the other comedies, and it is very comedic, and that is certainly what they're leaning into. But it's also like, it's a bit adventure, it's a bit historical, it's a bit romance, and it's a bit fantasy as well, because you get, there's a bit of sort of magic going on, isn't there, in El Dorado, and it is like this magical place, and they have this connection to the gods that looks very real, because our villain, whose name escapes me, but he summons like this demon thing. Yeah, so he summons this demon thing, doesn't he? And it's not a huge part of the narrative, and they're not hugely focusing it. And, people aren't running around sort of casting spells and stuff. But it's like there's just this air of something about it, like this air of mystic.
Yeah.
Like that the spirits are alive in this place.
The ancient arts sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Because it reminded me a little bit of Pocahontas at times as well, because you get a bit of that in that as well. Like I think they do some things with the fire, where they can see, their invaders coming and stuff, or they can see, Grandmother Willow as well as a talking tree.
thousands-year-old tree. Yeah. It adds a colour. It adds colour to the film, doesn't it? It really does.
And I think it was that sort of level of magic. Like, it's not about the magic. It's just kind of, it involves it in a way where it just kind of adds this little bit of mystery to the whole thing.
So we'll move on to talking about things that we perhaps would change, or that we didn't like about the film. Was there anything massive for you? Anything you really didn't like?
So one thing that I really would change, I wouldn't say that I totally disliked it, but Shell, who is our female love interest and protagonist for Tulio, she gets no character development whatsoever, and she's quite a significant part of the story. She's on screen for quite a long time and is obviously deciding that she wants to move back to Spain with Tulio, but you don't learn anything about her, not a single thing. You don't know who her family are. You don't find out why she wants to leave El Dorado. You don't find out why because she's a little bit on the fringes and a little bit of an outlaw. Like, they find her and she's running away because she's stolen something.
Yeah.
And you don't find out about any of that. And every time she's on screen and has a bit of dialogue, it's just to kind of reaffirm something that Tulio said, or she'll just say like, yes, or, she'll, I think Tulio asks her, where's Miguel? And she just goes, oh, dunno. And it's just so basic. And I was like, I wanted a bit more from that. Like, why does she want to leave her homeland to travel with this absolute stranger? Like, there's got to be a story there. I wanted more from her.
And I think if it was made now, you'd probably get that, wouldn't you?
Oh, definitely. Well, when you think about someone like Meg in Hercules, like, she's got her own things going on. And when you think of all, like, the love interests, but I think maybe this comes down to the fact that it's the two of them, isn't it? And it's, if you think of something like, well, I don't know, because then I was going to say, like, you think of something like Frozen, where you've got Anna and Elsa, who are obviously the two main characters, but then you still learn a lot about Kristoff. You learn a lot about Sven, for God's sake, and he's
Moose.
A reindeer.
Reindeer,
Moose,
whatever
sorry.
he is.
Oh, no, I think he's a reindeer.
He's not an adult woman, anyway.
So I just found it a bit, I left wanting more. I was like, this feels a bit weak and a bit lazy.
I'd never even considered that, to be honest. I mean, talk about male gaze. I mean, no, I'd never really thought about that. But no, I completely agree. Thinking about it now, she's sort of a little bit objectified. She doesn't get much of a story or much development. Even something as simple as, well, why are you so desperate to get out? You know, is it that because you don't even know, is it because she's bored? Is it because she's doesn't like her family? She doesn't seem to live anywhere. Doesn't seem to
Is
be.
she betrothed to another who she doesn't like?
Just something like that.
Even
Even if you look at something like Pocahontas, she's betrothed to a man she doesn't want to marry, or something like that. Like you say.
I mean, who knows why? Have you seen Cocoa?
Yeah. Talk about another guy with long, sexy hair. Ooh.
Oh, I know. I love it.
But
it was a real field day for little Alice.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I think I'd absolutely agree with that. It's not something I considered before, because even like something I noticed, and it's not really a dislike, but she's obviously stolen something from El Dorado, which where everything is made of gold. And if that's the case, I got the impression that she'd stolen that to sell it to start a new life.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's the case, if you lived in a city that was made of gold, would you know gold was valuable?
Mm-hmm.
Or would would it be like nicking a brick? Do you know what I mean? Or would it be like nicking a bit of corrugated roofing or something like that? Something I noticed, but no, I'd never noticed that about Chell before, and I think that's a really interesting point. And like I said, if it was made now, I think that would be different. I think you add 15 minutes onto the film, you give her a bit of play.
Yeah. Just a bit more. Like, I'm not asking for much. I know, it was only an hour and a half, and you've already got your two protagonists, so I appreciate that. But yeah, just a few sentences.
Yeah.
Just like, why do you want to go to Spain? Why have you fallen in love with this man that you've just met, etc., etc. What about you watching it this time around? Was there anything that you would maybe change, didn't like?
I mean, I'd certainly change that about Chell, but it's not in my notes because it genuinely didn't come to my mind. I think it's not. I don't know if it's a dislike. I was sort of trying to figure out why I thought it didn't do that well, because this was supposed to. This is quite the commercial flop in terms of the amount of money they put into it.
Yeah, I read that.
And I think, if I'm right in what I've read, that it was supposed to start a new franchise where, Miguel and Tulio and Chell would go and look for gold or go on adventures in other places, which I would love to see. But the only thing I could think was that perhaps it's not quite sure on what its audience is. It's the sort of the flip side of what we were saying about the comedy, and that perhaps there's not enough comedy in it for kids. Perhaps it's a little bit too scary. So perhaps it's maybe a bit adult for kids and a bit kids for adults. Does that make sense? So I'm wondering if that's like, maybe because it tries to have a foot in both camps a little bit too much, it possibly didn't lead to decent word of mouth. I mean, I know what I read of why it was a flop was mainly down to poor marketing. But I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. I thought perhaps there wasn't enough in there for kids.
I think I'd agree with you as well, because there's no young characters really.
No.
There's no kid characters, is it? They're all adults, and they've all got very sort of adult kind of desires, like making loads of money, and all this. So I did think that while I was watching it, like it felt more like an adult cartoon than a child's film, and it doesn't really have. Like, you've got some of the kind of chemistry between the two leads, but apart from that, there isn't like any family values in it, really.
I mean, what?
And it's not kind of got that sort of humbling kind of message that you want to be pushing out to your kids. It was just sort of, look at this, look how beautiful it is.
Yeah, their wants and desires, like you say, are quite adult, aren't they? Even down to the, they quite clearly sexualize female characters and that sort of thing. And I mean, like, if I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, like, what's the bit? What bits are kids going to enjoy? Obviously, it's very colourful. Songs are great. There's some great sort of swashbuckling scenes, and there's some good music and all that sort of stuff. But what would I take away from it as a kid? What would little Josh take away from it? Probably like the sports scene where they play the sort of ancient sport, which is like basketball. But other than that, like you say, it is. I mean, and even I'd say down to there are bits where I think Sekul Khan is a great villain, but he's almost probably maybe even a little bit too scary in places.
Maybe.
So I don't know. Maybe there's just not quite enough in there for kids to absolutely love this. But maybe I'm doing kids a disservice.
Maybe, but like you say, like it was a bit of a commercial failure. And if parents, and this was in the year 2000 as well, so we're not thinking, Twitter, Facebook or whatever. We're thinking parents talking to other parents
Yeah.
and saying, oh, should I take my kids to go and see this? And it's like, oh, well, no, maybe not. Like, oh, they didn't really enjoy it. They didn't really, like, I can't imagine sort of, if you're thinking about kind of like 6 or 7 year olds, again, I don't know many 6 or 7 year olds, so I don't know what they're thinking, but I can't imagine they would have been focused the whole time. Like when you're watching Frozen, like when Elsa comes on screen, you're like, oh my God, she's amazing. And then you've got Olaf on screen, is like, oh my God, he's the cutest thing ever. Because you had a little bit of cuteness with the horse, but he's not that cute. Like I thought he was great and a great character, and we always, we love the animal sidekick who's along for the ride. But he wasn't cute. Like he was massive. He was a war horse. They even say, don't they? It's like, oh, he's not a scared little pony or whatever. He's an aggressive war horse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You've got him, and you've got the little armadillo that's sort of just there.
Oh, yeah.
Who's clearly there to sell toys. But yeah, there's just not quite enough in there, I think. So let's move on to talking about the critical reception then, and then we'll try and come to a conclusion as to whether or not we think it's underrated or underseen. So how do you think it did, sort of? I mean, we've already touched on it a little bit. How do you think it did sort of with the critics?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think it did that well. I did have a little read and saw that it didn't do too well commercially. I don't think it made back its budget. And I'd kind of heard of it, I guess, but I just didn't know anything about it. I didn't know about any of the characters. And obviously, I don't know all the films, but like it was just weird for a film like that to have come out at that time, because I was a Disney kid and I did love all the Disney stuff. So, animation, all the Pixar, I was into all that. And this just wasn't on my radar at all. So I just wonder if it just didn't really hit the mark with people.
Yeah.
So I'd probably go in like the mid 6s, like probably thinking like 6.5-ish, and I'll probably leave it there because I'm not sure one way or the other. So I go bang on a mid 6, I reckon.
Okay, so you're not too far off, actually. So the IMDb at time of recording is 6.9 out of 10.
Oh, okay.
Rotten Tomatoes, which gives you a sort of a better picture, I think. The audience score is 66%, so not too dissimilar from the IMDb. But the critic score is 48%, which I think,
okay.
I think that's really harsh. I mean, personally, I even think the audience score is a little low, but the critic score, I think that's way, way too low.
That does feel very low. It almost, because again, when you're getting into those kind of numbers, it's like, is it a bad film? Is it a badly made film? Well, I don't think it is. I thought it looked great. It sounded great. The songs were really, really good. And Elton John was tied to it. How dare you give Elton John a 48%?
Sir Elton John.
Sir, exactly.
Yeah, and I had a little look at what the critics said, and there was nothing. It was all just, it was a bit uninspired. It was, when it sort of reeks a little bit of maybe a critic sort of going, it's not for me.
It's not Lion King. It's not Beauty and the Beast. It's not this.
It's not The Little Mermaid or whatever. And it's like, well, no, it's not. But what did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? You can't just say, well, it's not. It's not Apocalypse Now, is it? It's not The Godfather. But yeah. So I mean, what would you say for me? Well, go on. Well, you go first, and we'll see what you think.
I would certainly say the critic score is underrated. I certainly see what the audience are saying with that number, though, and kind of in around the 6 mark, because I think, like you say, it does sort of struggle with the striking the right balance of knowing who to go for in terms of audience and kind of how to achieve that. But I also think it's up against like really strong competition. Like when you think that Lion King would have just been out a couple of years earlier, and that is one that just stands out in people's minds, isn't it? Because it was so dramatic, but you got this sort of brilliant, beautiful ending as well. And I think maybe with this, it was a bit more casual, I guess. Like the stakes weren't as high. Nobody's parents were at risk, which is what a Disney film loves. So I wonder if maybe it was missing that kind of emotional connection with its audience. Yeah. And it was just like, it is more of a comedy and it is more fun.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if people were just looking for something else or something more. But in terms of the critic score, I would certainly say it's underrated, and I feel like you would feel the same way too.
Absolutely, I think it's very underrated by the critics. I would probably say it's slightly underrated by the audience as well. I'd probably give it a few more points, but maybe that's my nostalgia talking. And I do think it's underseen as well.
What would you what would you give it? Like
maybe
a
like
sort of mid-7?
Maybe like around there, mid-7 to 8. I think it did enough to start a franchise. I think it's fun. I think it's definitely critically underrated. I think it's probably underseen as well. Would you agree?
I mean, I would have to say that it's underseen, because I hadn't seen it. I don't really know anyone who's seen it. I've never kind of had it come up in conversation. But yeah, there you go. Listen, DreamWorks, if you're listening, Josh would love to see that franchise and those sequels.
So there we go. Another one which I think it's safe to say has been added to both the underrated and underseen pile. Alice, it's your turn to pick next week. What are we watching?
So, Josh, I thought it was about time we did another listener suggestion. So this one has been suggested by Sam of All Trades on Instagram, and it's Johnny Mnemonic, starring my favourite Keanu Reeves. So very excited about that one.
Why am I not surprised you've picked that one?
So sorry. What's this now? My third? Is this my third Keanu?
Something like that, yeah. Something like that.
I don't think that's too bad, actually, considering. Could have been much worse.
Right, well, join us next week where we're going to be talking about Johnny Mnemonic. Get it watched if you want to know what we're talking about. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, it's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. If you do get a little minute and you've enjoyed this episode, please do give us a 5-star review or a rating on Apple iTunes. You've got your phone in your hand or your pocket anyway. So, do us a favour, and it helps other people find out what.
Solid, guys.
Yeah, and it helps other people find out about what we think of the road to El Dorado. But yeah, join us next week for Johnny Mnemonic. Alice Oliver, thank you very much for joining me as ever.
Thank you so much, Josh. Pleasure as always.
It's goodbye from me. Cheerio.
Bye.